Good morning. This is Christina from River Valley Horticultural Products. Really excited to be with you today to talk about some of the questions that we all have about our landscape. Especially right now, we have all suffered a lot of damage in our landscape because of the recent weather event, which really is noted as about a 100-year event. We don't normally see those temperatures even every few decades. So our plants really took a hit from that. And I'm sure everybody's wondering what to do now. Well, the main thing is you want to address how healthy were your plants going into this. If they didn't perform well last year or the last few years, they may not have made it through this because it was a pretty brutal event for any living thing outside. Another thing is if your landscape has been in for 10, 15 years or longer, you have a good root system, but if they weren't healthy again going into this event, you may well have lost them. So first we want to caution you to just relax. It's not the end of the world. Plants really are resilient and they are very much able to withstand environmental changes to a certain degree. Now, everybody has had sunburned leaves on your plants. Well, actually, I say sunburned. It's actually freezer burn. Your leaves mostly cannot take that extended period of dry cold, especially with the snow mounded up against them. So those leaves probably are turning brown and falling off at this time. So don't be alarmed if you walk out, one day and you've got a lot of brown leaves and you're worried about it, but then you walk out 2 days later and every leaf is on the ground. People do become a little bit alarmed. Just know that your plant will usually recover from that. There's a lot of plants that you can scratch the bark a little bit, and if there's a small layer of green below that outer layer of bark, then there is still life there. So you do have potential for regrowth of these plants. Now, you can do some trimming to the tips and you can do some cleanup right now if you would like to, especially if your plants are a little overgrown anyway. It's okay to take a little bit off, but we're still in a wait and see mode because once your buds start swelling and leafing out, that's when we're going to figure out how much internal damage there is to that plant. If your capillary system is broken down, where the plant cannot pass those fluids and nutrients back and forth through the tissues, then you're going to lose that part and you're going to see that damage will be obvious not long after they do leaf out if they make it that far. Now, if you see that in the next few weeks, months even, because some plants really have a slow metabolism, take a little bit longer to show that they're hurt. So just again, be patient. We may have lost the blooming buds on some of our hydrangeas, but otherwise they all seem to be leafing out, or beginning to bud very nicely. So most of your deciduous plants probably didn't suffer at all. It is the evergreens, the ones that we think of as being the most resilient, because they have leaves year-round. They actually are more susceptible because they're out there taking all that damage, and that damage does translate internally as well. So if anybody sees damage that you're unsure of, or you just really want to know if it's going to make it, do that little scratch test on the bark. And again, wait and see. Mother Nature can certainly work miracles, and if surviving this freeze is a miracle, then we're surrounded by miracles. Most of my plants in my yard, aside from some freezer burn, they woke up from that just beautifully. So if you have any questions and you're not sure where to proceed from here, give us a call here. We're always more than happy to answer your questions. Now I'm going to go ahead and just see what kind of questions I'm getting in here and see if I can maybe answer something that I haven't already mentioned. Somebody is questioning about gardenias. Gardenias are one of those evergreens that have a really nice glossy leaf, and certainly depending on exposure, meaning how far out in the sun you are, how much cover you may have from trees or patio or shade from something, can give them a little bit of shelter. But if your leaves completely went brown and are currently drying up and falling off, then do that little cut back and scratch test. Then you're going to know at least to expect something from that shrub this year. If you do not see green under that bark, then I'm afraid you've probably lost your plant. Now, some plants will kill all of the top growth, and your roots may still be viable. So if you scratch, don't see green, go a little further down, scratch again. If you still don't see green, continue a little bit further down into the plant until you do. If you don't, then none of that is going to come back to life. It's not magic. It may be miraculous, but it's not magic. Go ahead and trim all of those off. And again, unless you're really impatient to get something in the ground to replace it, wait a little bit longer, because a lot of times your roots are still fully hardy and can force out new growth, even if they've lost the entire above ground part of it. One thing, I've got a few people asking about fertilizer. Let's go ahead and talk real quick, because I can't get off my soapbox about this. There's a big difference between fertilizer and fertility. If your soil is not rich, if you do not have a fair amount of organic matter to that soil, then any fertilizer you put in there doesn't have those chains that it needs to bond to so that your roots can access it. So we're always quick to ask questions when we get these questions to kind of clear things up. If you've got really poor soil, you're wasting your money on fertilizer. In some cases, you've got a stressed plant if your soil is poor. Therefore, it's not able to really receive the benefits of that fertilizer that you are spending so much money on. In fact, it can cause it to become even more ill and even die. So pay attention to your soil, because the more you do that, the less you're going to have to buy fertilizer. Plants really are pretty self-sufficient. We certainly can fertilize. We want to fertilize to help aid their growth and development, particularly if this is a vegetable or fruiting plant. They require a lot more nutrition than a simple landscape plant. Now, about fertilizer and when to use it, we really don't recommend using fertilizer until about, I would say, the whole month of April. If you live in southern Arkansas, where you're a little warmer, early April is fine for fertilizing. You should be past the average last frost date by that point. But if you live in the northern tier of Arkansas, you really do need to wait until late April, because you don't want to force growth to come on prematurely and then get damaged by a late freeze. So hold off just a little bit longer on fertilizing. But again, know why you're fertilizing. If you're fertilizing because the plant truly needs it, then fine, go ahead on schedule. If your plant has not been performing well, it may not be a nutrient thing. It may be a soil network thing. There are so many soil organisms that work really hard to build these bonds underground, things we don't ever see. That is the most important part of every plant, is what is under the ground. So the more effort you can put into creating a wonderful environment for those roots, the more you're going to be rewarded by healthy growth. And fertilizers definitely can improve your bloom ability, your greening up. And they are needed at times, but I think a lot of people focus a little too much on throwing fertilizer at a problem when that may not be the issue. Sometimes a weak growing plant will definitely look like it needs some fertilizer. It may have a disease. It may simply have a deficiency of one or two nutrients that's not really corrected by throwing one of your typical all-purpose fertilizers at it. Let me see what we've got here. I have somebody questioning about their lilies, some pass-along lilies that they had. Say the leaves are up, but they're not budding. Remember, I know we get a little excited this time of year. It is only mid-March. It is too early for most lilies. You should be seeing things like daffodils, possibly crocus, and a few other spring bulbs blooming. Possibly even some viburnums. Forsythia are definitely blooming. But lilies are going to take a little longer. That soil really has to warm up enough for them to force that growth out. Azaleas with a white coating on them. Let's just talk about some issues that a lot of shrubs have. And they're usually pest issues as opposed to disease issues. I will touch on the azaleas. What you probably have that you're seeing is a little bit of damage from the cold on those stems, but this is also a really good time for some insects to begin mating, to begin laying eggs. So you're going to see that. Now, these little creatures that you're seeing now, what's going to become possibly the lace bugs that will be sucking juices out of your leaves during the summer. So damage happens in the summer, you don't know what it is. That's something that actually started and could have been addressed early in the season when that activity first started. And let me find my neem here. Neem that's root stimulator. We've got neem available actually as a concentrate or a spray. The concentrate you would mix with water and use a sprayer. This is an organic method of stopping any of that weird activity that's on your shrubs in the early stages. This is a insecticide, miticide, and a fungicide. So it's good, kind of an almost all-purpose. But this does help to address when they are active. Another way to address that is going to be systemic. And I'll go ahead and move from azaleas through a number of different classes of plants that have insect issues that are best treated with a systemic. Azaleas are one of those. It's going to stop your lacewings from the visible damage you see in the summer. Camellias get tea scale. Crepe myrtles get crepe myrtle bark scale. What else? You've got all of your conifers are prone to getting bagworms. So all of these things can be addressed by simply using a systemic. And it's not only available, this is a concentrate that you literally mix a few tablespoons per gallon of water, pour in a ring around the base of your plant. Those roots take it in and distribute this medicine throughout every cell in the plant. Very much like when we get inoculated against a certain illness or disease. But what this does, in some cases, it will outright kill the pest. In some cases, it simply interrupts their reproductive system or their development system. But the end result is you're not going to have trouble with that insect. And that's really important. Crepe myrtles are ubiquitous. We see them everywhere all over the South, and Northerners hate us because of it. But there are a lot of trade-offs with that. If everybody is planting crepe myrtles, and if everybody is cutting their heads off every year, really set ourselves up for a big issue with crepe myrtle bark scale, which we are certainly seeing more and more over the last 5 years. It has just exploded in Arkansas. So what a lot of people notice is the black, kind of sooty looking stuff on the leaves and the bark. That's actually not the problem. The problem is the insect that was feeding on your plant, whenever they defecate on anything, it's very sticky. And that feeding happens in spring and summer when we are really hot and humid. So it has no choice but to become a mold, a black sooty mold. But without the insect, you don't get that issue at all. So something like a systemic, generally about 2 to 3 times a year during the growing season, we are going to quit having these issues. However, if you or your neighbor or someone you know cuts the heads off of their crepe myrtles every year, just maybe politely say that really is the wrong way to do it, because we have created such a big issue with these plants simply by maintaining them incorrectly. So a simple limbing up, cut any ground growth, limb up any crossing limbs, and that's all the pruning you really ever need to do on a crepe myrtle. If you need to cut it down every year because it's right next to your house, then we have bigger issues than just what disease this plant has. We need to get that plant out of there because it's in the wrong place, and it's always going to create an issue for you. Let's see. Getting a question about good types of flowers to plant in a flower bed that can take a lot of direct sun. We'll talk a little bit about perennials because they are what we think of. That's really our party throughout the summer, is the perennials that we plant. Daylilies, coneflowers, black-eyed Susan, salvia, irises. All of these things really contribute to that buildup of summer color. And all of those would do well in full sun. But remember that some of those that are native or cultivars of native plants can actually take more shade than you would think as well. They're very adaptable as to their conditions. In fact, coneflowers can grow in wet or dry soil, clay, sand. They don't seem to care. They're really tough. Let's see. How many applications of the neem? Good question. That really, you should always observe. Answer that question with your eyes, with what you see. Usually you're going to, if you've got a good infestation, you're going to need to hit that with neem about every 7 to 10 days until the problem is controlled. Now, if you start out with, if we're not talking about vegetable or fruit plants, if you start out with the systemic, you'll need the neem a whole lot less. But the neem can help a lot. It really controls a lot of insects that, particularly aphids and things like that, that like to chew on that fresh new foliage that comes out. It's pretty good for getting rid of those. And funguses become a big issue as well with our high heat and humidity in the summer. So it does help prevent those as well. Let's see, butterfly bushes. If your butterfly bush is one of the really large ones, or even a small one, we've probably lost a lot of these growing tips on those. So definitely you can cut those back now. Now is the perfect time to cut back ornamental grasses, roses, butterfly bushes, and like I said, do any of that limbing up and clean up that you might need to do on crepe myrtles or any tree form blooming shrub. Let's see, I'll go ahead and mention right now some of the things that are blooming that you will probably see in your yard. And we'll go back to winter damage here. These are 2 types of camellias. We sell roughly 30 types of camellias or varieties of camellias here at River Valley. This particular type is Camellia japonica, which blooms at this time of year. But let's talk about winter damage, because if you already have some of these, japonica is the one very much more susceptible to those cold temperatures, to cold winds, drying winds. So you likely have seen a lot of freezer burn and damage, depending again on how well it's sheltered, on your Camellia japonicas, but they're just stunning. And if you need help maybe figuring out what to do if you've had severe damage, again, go back to the method of the little scratch test and see if you've got some life under that bark. And that'll tell you how far back you may need to trim it so that it really flushes out and does well for you next year. Okay, how do you tell what the quality of your soil is? Boy, that is, I could talk for about 5 hours about soil. And if you really are curious, there's so many paths you can go down to learn some things that are really kind of basic. The closer we can get to nature with what we're trying to achieve, the better off we are. Compost is always good to add, regardless of what you're planting. But some plants, particularly woody shrubs and trees, if you notice when you pull it out of a nursery pot, there's usually a lot of bark to that mix. And that is what the growers use. Definitely some pine bark helps keep your soil from becoming too compacted over time, but it also gives your nutrients and water molecules a bond, something to bond to, so that they stay in that area and are available to your roots when they need it. Now, about your quality of soil, color has a little bit to do with it, but not much. You can certainly take soil samples. We do have a wonderful cooperative extension service here in Arkansas, and they do soil testing constantly. So if you think you may need, certain nutrients added, or you're planning to start a garden or a vegetable garden, certainly get your soil tested. But every time I dig a hole, I add compost. I've done that for over 30 years. And I have always had fantastic luck. I've still got some of those shrubs that have been with me for over 30 years because I do my building on a solid foundation. If I give it good soil and good organic matter to grow on, then I'm rewarded by decades and decades of good, solid, healthy growth. And I actually fertilize very little. So it's just not part of my budget to throw a lot of fertilizer at a problem when I can prevent it by making that soil great going into it. And then later down the road, certainly you can add some compost, just top dress with compost. Those soil organisms will figure out a way to work that into the soil down to the root zone where it can be used by the plant. Let's see. Okay, so again, I'm not getting any current questions, so let me just mention that this cool stuff behind me, of course, all available here, but keep in mind that these plants are fully outdoor hardy in Arkansas. Most of your local nurseries, that's mostly what they deal in because it is our business to help you create your sanctuary and make your home and your landscape what you want it to be. We don't sell a lot of things that aren't going to be with you for many, many years. Now, of course, we do tropicals in season, but we let you know it's a tropical. It's not something you can expect to be with you for decades, as opposed to the majority of these plants here that can give you a really, really long life with very little maintenance. So let's go ahead and talk about maintenance. As a designer and as a gardener, I don't like it. Most people don't. There's actually people that consider maintenance therapy, okay? I'm not one of them. So I'm always on that lower end on maintenance. I want you to have shrubs that will grow into the space you've got for them. Every question you ask, I may ask 10 questions in return because I want to know that you're getting exactly the right thing that's going to serve your needs without causing a lot of angst or anxiety as opposed to putting out a shrub that's maybe a little cheaper and more common. Those are the ones that get out of hand. Most of your modern shrubs for landscapes are dwarf. They're exactly what we've been asking for, and they're pretty much exactly what your modern suburban landscape has evolved into, which is a very small amount of space. You know, if you've only got a 3-foot wide bed, we don't need a shrub that's going to get 6, 8, 10, 12 feet tall and wide. It's just too much. But a lot of these behind me are dwarf and may only get 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. Now, of course, we've got, all different sizes and just about anything you would need for your landscape, regardless of what you're trying to achieve. It's kind of our goal to help you picture your sanctuary, and then let's build that together. It's actually much simpler than most people realize. But when you drive down the road or through your neighborhood and you see just a row of green at every house, you're not standing out. You're kind of boring. I would much rather be the yard with a little party going on all the time, or the crazy quilt. But my switch off is I don't depend on blooms for my crazy quilt. I depend on foliage in different colors, different textures, different plant forms, and that's really what gives you the best visual picture. Let's see, anything else? I think I have blocked myself off of this screen. We'll go ahead and talk about what you're going to see coming up in the next few weeks. Like I said, right now we've got cherries beginning to bloom. If you've got a really pretty pink cherry blooming, that is okame. But pretty close behind that is going to be snow goose and yoshino and kwanzan. And these are lovely additions to the landscape. If you do not have one, you may want to check them out. They're really, really pretty. Also coming up are azaleas. Some are beginning to bloom now. Just remember they have actually several seasons of bloom. And then there's the types that re-bloom. So I'll go ahead and mention the difference. If you have an azalea that blooms once a year, it is most likely one of the old-fashioned varieties that prefers morning sun and afternoon shade. These usually don't play very well in a lot of situations. People will put them on the south or the west side of their house. And that's really, really brutal because at heart, this is a shade plant. Now, because customers have been asking for decades and decades, I want it to bloom more often. I want it to bloom red. I want to grow it in sun. That's when they developed the reblooming types of azaleas such as Encore and Bloomathon and Rebloom. These are really, really cool additions to your landscape, and they do give you a lot more color because in general they bloom in spring, they take a short rest, they bloom in summer, again a short rest, and then they bloom in the fall. Other than that, they're evergreen, so you really do get a much broader picture in your landscape with the newer reblooming types as opposed to the older ones. Now, the older ones are very romantic and everybody's ideal of what spring is. Dogwoods blooming, azaleas below them. And that's fine. That's actually beautiful too. But there's a lot more options. Dogwoods and old-fashioned azaleas do not work out very well in a full sun landscape. So now you have other options if that is your case. Okay, butterfly bushes, I think I kind of touched on that, but didn't quite. To me, a butterfly bush is always better cut really hard at the beginning of the year because it's going to bloom on new growth. And you would rather it flush out with lots of new growth and lots of larger blooms rather than have these little smaller blooms all set out amongst a woody shrub. So I cut those back hard now, even the dwarf ones. But I will say that my dwarf ones, every stem got killed back, but at the base, definitely starting to flush out with those really pretty silvery gray leaves. So it's okay to cut those back now, certainly. Best fertilizer for clematis. That's really kind of a matter of choice. You do want something balanced. If it is something that is newly planted, I always recommend starting every plant with root stimulator, which is really just a low dose fertilizer. It's a little higher in phosphorus, and phosphorus is what tells your plant to kick in and start rooting. At higher levels, that phosphorus causes your plant to start blooming. So when you see superphosphate or triple phosphate, that's really to encourage heavy blooming from whatever plant you apply it to. But just a quick aside on that, I will never use superphosphate because it is death to soil organisms. At high levels, they cannot function the same way. So essentially, you're kind of killing out your plant's army in order to build a wall around it with something like that. So don't get extra bloom and sacrifice the health of your plant and your soil to do that. Blooms are going to come every year like clockwork. We don't have to really throw a lot of money at them to get them to do that. Somebody mentioning the tulip magnolias or saucer magnolias blooming at the zoo yesterday. That is another lovely spring blooming tree that's coming into bloom now. Redbuds are just beginning, and dogwoods are actually a little further down the road. Most people, if they see something white blooming this time of year, they say, "Oh, it's a dogwood." Well, no, pears come before dogwoods. Serviceberry comes before dogwoods. Cherry comes before dogwoods. Dogwoods are usually going to be an April blooming tree. Best mulch for water retention is one of my questions. I would say the key is mulch. Always mulch. But again, I will get up on my soapbox about dyed mulch. I don't like the stuff, never have. It's not logical to me even. If somebody notices my mulch, then I am clearly doing something wrong in my landscape, because that should be the last thing they notice. They should notice how the landscape embraces the home and property and how well it all looks together. If you're seeing my red mulch, yeah, I messed up. Because that's so not even the point. Other than that, you can use almost any mulch, natural mulch, certainly hardwood, double grind hardwood, triple grind hardwood, cedar, pine, all of those are wonderful mulches. Even pine straw mulch is very clean, very easy to work with. They all pretty much achieve the same thing, which is helping to keep your soil temperature consistent, and helping to keep it from drying out. It maintains that moisture level, but it also is going to reduce weeds, and that's something I think everybody is on board with. I would say if you really kind of want a strong opinion about what type to use, I'll say that I have recommended double grind hardwood for almost every landscape design that I have done. Now, let's talk about the more inorganic mulches, which are rock mulches. And about using a rock mulch, a lot of people like that because they think it's not going to have weeds, and it's something they don't have to freshen up or replace every year or every few years. But remember what I said about making your soil great. Doubly important if you're going to put a layer of rock over that soil. It still acts as a mulch, helps to retain moisture, helps to maintain temperature, but it also does not ever give you another opportunity to enrich that soil with compost or bark or anything like that. So if you choose to use rock as a mulch, I highly recommend that you make your soil as organic as possible before you put that stone down on it, because you will not get another chance to increase that value of the soil to the plant. Azaleas, gardenias, a volunteer magnolia. Too late to move it? No, not at all. Do that right now. Get as much of the root as you can, and try not to break those roots. Congratulations, you are the new owner of a baby magnolia, but I wish you luck with it. Sometimes they settle in well, sometimes they don't. And if it's a southern magnolia, I hope you've got an acre or two. They become ginormous. In the industry, or at River Valley particularly, the majority of the magnolias that we sell that are evergreen are actually dwarf varieties. So you get small growth, which most people don't have the size property, nor will they live long enough to see a southern magnolia really become what it's great for and what it's well known for. It is okay to trim back climbing roses, shrub roses, drift roses, knockout roses. Any type of rose you have can be pruned now, except I would say if you have a Lady Banks rose, which is an evergreen, thornless climbing rose, really been in the industry for many, many years. You will not want to prune it right now because it is already starting to bloom. Anything else, most of your roses do bloom later in the season, and all of those are okay to cut now. Will your hostas come back? I would say yes. We're really having and showing good response here at the nursery. Even, and our hostas are in containers above ground, and we're under that snow and went through all of those temperatures. So, and they are beginning to pop up now. So yes, you should have your hostas coming back. You shouldn't have any effect on them with this weather because they were fully dormant. And our ground did not freeze for very long, even though we were at those pretty cold temperatures. The ground was probably only frozen, I would say, the top 3 to 4 inches at the coldest, and at that probably not longer than 5 to 6 days was it in that condition. Really not enough to hurt your crowning plants like hostas, daylilies. The majority of your perennials just did not suffer at all from this event. Now, not having any more questions coming in at the moment, so I just want to mention that, this is a hot time of year for our business. Everybody wants to do everything in spring. Just remember in the future that spring is not even the best time for a lot of plants. We're very fortunate in the state of Arkansas that we can plant anytime the ground is not frozen and anytime the temperature is not above 90 degrees. So having said that, my planting period in my own landscape generally runs from about October through March, April. After that, I lay off because I've done as much as I want to do. But no, it is absolutely not too late to plant anything right now. Now, if you're growing a vegetable garden, there are some things that if you started from seed, they would take a while to really become large enough and capable enough of taking your garden environment. You're a little late on those, but not necessarily, because there's always late tomatoes. But generally, first of the year, January, is a good time to start seeds for those hot crops that really take a long time to grow, like tomatoes, eggplant, and peppers. But there's a lot of them that you can just literally direct seed in the ground. Okra, squash, cucumbers, all of those can just be put in whenever you're ready. And as soon as the ground is warm enough, they're going to come up and start growing like gangbusters. Now, we're not quite to our average last frost date, which is usually around April 15th, I believe, for the central part of the state. But we're pretty close. So I would say if you do go ahead and do your seeding or any vegetable garden planting, if we're going to get below 40, give them a nice little cover. Otherwise, you may wake up the next morning and all of your hard work and expectations are down the drain, because they can be killed rather quickly. Okay. I will say that, let's see, Loropetalum. Loropetalum is what everybody's asking about because they're in every neighborhood. Yes, most of your leaves did get freezer burned, but if you look at your plant closely, you're going to see those bud swellings along the stem. Again, you can trim it back if you want, but just kind of wait and see what happens with those buds to see if it fully leaves back out. You can trim to shape, of course, as soon as you're ready and those buds start swelling. I guess that's it for now. Well, okay. Let me see what else I've got here. Weeds do not seem to be affected by the freeze. Of course not. They are tidy little packages that can sometimes wait years for perfect condition to sprout. So just they're troopers. Just whatever method you usually use to get rid of them, or if you need advice on getting rid of them, by all means, call or come see us at River Valley. We have lots of experience with that. Let's see, gardenias, loropetalums. Yes, please prune those in the next few weeks. And just keep an eye on them otherwise. Now, if I missed anybody's questions, I'm sorry. I'm a newbie at this, so it's a little fun trying to talk and see questions down at the bottom. But if there's anything, if you just think of a question later, if there's something that is not going on now, but you wake up 2 days from now and every leaf is on the ground, just kind of keep in mind we're in a cautious wait and see period with our landscapes. But if it was unhealthy, if it's been in place 15, 20 years, now would be an excellent time to consider throwing all of that out and starting fresh with plants that are maybe a little better suited to not only our environment, but your landscape and your life personally. And that's what we try to gear things towards. Each customer is a custom customer. River Valley has really just been I guess an eye-opener for me. I've been in this business my whole life, and I've never had the pleasure of working with so many people that take it so seriously. But yet it's a passion for all of us. So it really is a privilege and honor when somebody comes to us and asks us for help or to help them design their own sanctuary. And we very much appreciate that. Just looking to see if I have any other questions. I don't want to leave anybody out, but of course, if I did miss you, don't take it personally. Feel free to call us, and we'll try to set you on track. Okay, I have a question about coffee grounds and eggshells used in a vegetable garden. Yes, those are beneficial, certainly. They're natural, organic things that you could even be adding to a compost pile should you choose to start your own and create your own organic compost to plant with and to work with. I would say definitely kind of grind up your eggshells, because it can take them quite some time to break down by weather and soil organisms. But yes, coffee grounds are going to be. Let's see. The question is actually which plants can you use them on? Answer is any of them. All plants benefit from a small shot of nitrogen, and the calcium contained in your eggshells is really beneficial for a lot of them too. Now, the ones that need it the most, if you're growing tomatoes, by all means, calcium. They really are heavy feeders. And if you ever have had blossom end rot, or really even a cat face tomato, that really is an indicator that your plant was not able to have enough sources of calcium while it was developing. So that has a lot to do with disease resistance and fruit development. And even with fruiting trees and shrubs, apples, peaches, any of those highly benefit from not only organic fertilizers, but high calcium. High calcium in that soil is helpful. It is not too late to plant broccoli, cabbage, or peas. Get it done pretty quick. They love this time of year. I have a question about lichen on azaleas. And let's go ahead and, I guess, clear up what lichen is. When you see a rock or a tree trunk that has the little kind of furry looking, almost gray or green patches on them, and some lichen even are not just flat, but kind of stick out and, froth out from the plant like a moss would. Generally, if you see a bunch of lichen on the interior of your plant, that means that the plant has really been exposed to a lot of sun. Probably a little more sun than some of them would like. So it's a matter of it's not sunburn or sun scald, but it creates a hot area where that lichen can colonize. Now, it is not detrimental to your plant in any way. I personally think it's quite attractive, but it can be a little weird when you notice all this gray-green stuff growing on the stems of your plant. But just know that that is fine. It's not an indicator of plant health, usually. If you still are questionable about that, bring us some pieces in or some pictures, and we can spend a little more time discussing what's going on there. Let's see, a butterfly tree. I'll go ahead and mention that in this business, kind of like at the doctor's office, it's real important to know and pin down exactly what you're talking about. A lot of common names: butterfly bush, butterfly tree, tulip tree, saucer magnolia. These are really common names that kind of come along with our vernacular. Whatever your grandmother called it is probably what you call it. But those names do not necessarily pin it down specifically to what species of plant this is. If it is a butterfly bush that is trained with a trunk as tree form, then go ahead and do your pruning whenever you're ready. If it is something else, I've heard a saucer magnolia called a butterfly tree before, because when they bloom, it kind of looks like pink or whitish colored wings coming out. So I can be more specific with that question if I know a little more information on what exactly your plant looks like. Let me see if I've got anybody else that's just burning for information. You are welcome to those who have commented. Thank yous for answering questions. it's pretty much what I do all day. If I'm not designing a landscape for someone, I'm answering questions. I'm on the phone, I'm emailing, certainly people in person that have a lot of questions about landscapes. And that's essentially, I guess, the reason I exist, because I, have discovered after 45 years of learning outdoors and in the garden, I am Alexa. I have the most random answers to the most random questions. And if you ask me something I don't know, it's on. It's a mission. I've got to find out what the answer is, or we've got to find out together. So always we encourage that communication with you because we're passionate about it. We really care about how our state looks, how our local areas look. And stress is a big thing for people in all walks of life, rich or poor, doesn't matter. I think most people find that when they work with plants, whether it is to get herbs and vegetables or just to have something blooming in the yard or a tree to sit under, plants really do serve as a pretty strong stress reliever and help us reconnect with nature, especially when we feel a little lost in the real world. It can be very grounding, but also enthralling. There is always something new to learn, and even though I have 45 years in this, I am constantly learning almost every day new things about gardening and landscaping. So always be curious. I think that keeps you young, and I think it keeps you happy too, a lot less stressed. Now, I am not seeing any more questions. How much time do we have? Keep going. Okay, I can keep going. If anyone has any questions, again, that's what we live for around here. Thank you for your thank yous. And I guess we have customers that usually come in for our Saturday seminars that we normally hold in January and February before the spring season really kicks off. And of course, last year and this year we were not able to hold those gatherings, and we really, really have missed that. My coworkers and I just love the feedback and the interchange between you guys. So I've had a few customers, type in that they're ready for the chocolate chip cookies and they're ready for a cup of coffee and they just want to sit and chat about gardening. And we're exactly that kind of person too. So we just want to, and it's kind of tearing me up a little bit. We have really missed those that haven't been able to come see us. We hope you're well. We hope you're in good spirits and remain that way. River Valley is a special place to a lot of people, most especially the people that work here. And we're so thankful for the support you give us, because if you weren't out there helping us, I wouldn't have the best job in the world. So again, thank you from my heart. Now, once I cool off a moment, want to see if there's any other questions. Quince. If you want to trim back quince, hello Charlie. If you want to trim back quince, go ahead and wait till after the bloom, or even trim and bring those stems in so that you can enjoy them inside. But certainly you can trim them before or after bloom. Now, the lady that was asking about the butterfly tree says it is a bush trained in tree form with a trunk. So you may be a little more iffy on that. If you're not seeing some of that gray-green furry growth happening at the juncture of the graft, then you have probably lost the top. Now, it will be grafted onto the rootstock of another butterfly bush. So if you see some coming out at the base and not at the top, then you haven't lost the roots. You've just lost that main stem at the top. So just kind of keep that in mind, that all is not lost, even if you did lose your top. That sounded a little risque. Okay. Let's see. If I was a little better with the laptop here, I would be a little smoother with this. Thank you for your patience. Yes, it is an appropriate time to plant pecan trees. Great time to plant any of your fruiting trees or bushes. So we've got lots and lots of varieties of blueberries. We've got peaches, plums, apples, pears. We've got muscadine. We've got figs. Now pecan, we've got persimmon. But it's an excellent time to get all of those things started right now. And supplies are really starting to come in a lot. Just want to mention real quick, blackberries. U of A has really led the market in blackberries for many years, thanks to their development of a lot of thornless, a lot of erect growing that don't quite vine out so much, and really big berries. So keep those in mind. If you want a really easy fruit production in your yard, let me name off the best fruits to grow: blueberry, blackberry, fig, persimmon, and serviceberry. All of those are so easy, so low maintenance, and will give you so much return on your time that they're well worth growing. Some other fruits definitely require more time and attention and money outlay as far as their yearly maintenance schedule. Your St. Augustine grass, I think, is still going to be a little bit. That does not usually break dormancy until we get to late April, early May. So if you don't see some growth happening, a month to 6 weeks from now, then you may have patches that are lost. Okay, I guess that's about all the time I have for questions and to talk. Love talking to all of you and sharing information, showing people around this awesome nursery, and love it when you meet my co-workers who are just the best. We all kind of have that same passion and same heart for helping you solve your problems in the landscape. So next time you're out, be sure to stop and say hello. Really look forward to this season and helping you to plan your sanctuary. Thank you, and I'll see you soon at River Valley.